Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are digging into the roots of American identity, really getting into the works of James Fenimore Cooper, the man who, well, who basically invented the American literary hero.
And we're starting, believe it or not with a quill and parchment, but with gunpowder. Cooper's own origin story is almost as dramatic as the frontier he'd later write about.
That's so true. You probably know Cooper as the author of the Leatherstocking Tales, but way before he was defining the American novel, he was, let's say, defining collegiate chaos. Can you believe he was expelled from Yale back in 1805?
And it wasn't for, bad grades or anything like that. It was for this act of pure youthful rebellion. He set off an explosion.
An explosion.
A real one. It completely blew the door off another student's dormitory. It's just an incredible image, right? The future chronicler of the silent, pristine American forest, making his first big mark with a spectacular, unauthorized detonation.
It sets the stage perfectly, doesn't it? Here's a man with enormous passion and clearly a real aversion to just conforming to the established rules, a trait we see just perfectly echoed in his greatest creation.
Indeed. And our mission today is to do a real deep dive into that creation, the Deerslayer. It's chronologically the first of the 5 Leatherstocking Tales. We're here to unpack the rigorous and I'd say often contradictory moral architecture that Cooper built around his hero, Natty Bumppo.
Who in this novel is known as Deerslayer.
Exactly.
We've got a whole stack of sources here, direct excerpts from the novel, some fantastic critical analysis, and we're going to use them to scrutinize the moral choices Natty makes on this pre-revolutionary colonial frontier. It's set specifically between 1740 and 1745. And we really want to understand how Cooper idealized this hero, especially in the face of what was, historically, a really brutal and morally compromised landscape.
It's a fascinating study because Cooper gives us this character who is almost perfect, operating in a world that is deeply, deeply flawed. And the novel keeps asking, how long can that perfection possibly last?
Okay, so let's start with the turbulence of Cooper's early life. We know he came from a privileged background, private tutors, all that, which got him into Yale. But that expulsion in 1805, that really seems like the pivot point. It's like he was refusing to be tamed, rejecting that traditional path.
It absolutely was. That explosion was more than just some college prank. It was a rejection of the rigid academic structure of the time.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, his literary life began not when he picked up a pen, but when he blew up that door.
Yeah.
It literally forced him onto a different trajectory.
And that trajectory led him to the sea. He pivoted directly into military service. He joined the U.S. Navy as a midshipman.
Which was a really smart move, actually. The Navy offered structure, sure, but also a tremendous amount of freedom and exposure to these remote parts of the, burgeoning nation.
Right.
He had postings that spanned these geographic extremes. He was at an isolated post on Lake Ontario, which, crucially, gave him direct experience of the frontier world that would later define his writing. And then later, a much more relaxed assignment in New York City.
And it was during that relatively leisurely assignment, as our sources put it, that his life really changed forever. He meets Susan Augusta Delancey.
From a very powerful, very wealthy family.
And he resigns his commission in 1811 to marry her. He settles into what seems like the life of a comfortable, landowning gentleman. The story should end there.
It should, but it doesn't. The seeds of his writing career were planted years later. And not by ambition, but by pure exasperation and a fantastic domestic challenge. The family lore around this is one of the best anecdotes in all of American literary history.
Let's hear it. Tell us about the dare. It just sounds almost too cinematic to be true.
Well, the story goes that Cooper was reading a contemporary novel, probably one of those novels of manners from Europe that just dominated the literary market back then.
Right.
And he got so frustrated with the quality of the writing, or maybe the story itself, that he threw the book across the room in disgust.
And declared he could write a better one himself.
Exactly. But here's the crucial part. Susan called him on it. She knew he intensely disliked the actual act of writing. Our sources confirm he could barely stand to write a letter. So this marital dare was the necessary spark. He had to prove it.
It's just fascinating that the first true literary pioneer in America was pushed into it by sheer pride and a challenge from his wife. He took it seriously, though. He published his first novel, Precaution, in 1820.
And that book is often forgotten now, and for good reason. It was another one of those novels of manners, closely mimicking the British style, all about high society and domestic politics. It wasn't distinctly American yet.
He was still finding his voice, still practicing.
Yeah, but the reviews were encouraging enough. He wrote quickly, and the shift to American themes was almost immediate. Just a year later, 1821, The Spy comes out, a historical romance set right in the middle of the American Revolution.
And The Spy was the turning point.
It absolutely was. It established him instantly as this major literary figure. It gave Americans the kind of national dramatic story they were craving, set in their own history, not just imported from England.
Which leads us to his singular achievement. He wasn't just a successful author. Cooper became the very first American to make a living purely as a professional novelist. I mean, think about that milestone. Before him, being an author was often a side gig, supported by another profession.
Yep.
Cooper proved it could be a viable career in the young republic.
It's such a powerful context, especially when you think about the historical backdrop of that period,
Yeah.
1812 to 1821. It was a time of immense national growing pains. You had the War of 1812, the humiliation of the burning of Washington, D.C., and then these huge surges of patriotism, like the writing of the Star-Spangled Banner.
And politically, you had the explosive tension of the Missouri Compromise. America was trying to figure out what it was, where its moral boundaries were. And Cooper steps right into this moment and starts literally defining the American landscape and the American character through his heroes. The timing couldn't have been better for his frontier sagas to just resonate with people.
That brings us perfectly to the Deerslayer and the world it creates. The action is so carefully placed between 1740 and 1745, specifically before the outbreak of King George's War. And that is crucial because it allows Cooper to capture a moment of true virgin wilderness.
Our sources really emphasize this. At this time, the settled parts of the colony of New York were just these very narrow coastal strips and river valleys. Literally everything else was this vast expanse of woods. It's an American Eden, right? Largely untouched by the complex moral failings of organized society.
And this virginity is where the novel opens. The very first scene places us in the heart of this deep forest. On a cloudless day in June, this pristine environment becomes the moral standards that all the characters are judged against.
And the centerpiece of this pristine world is the Glimmerglass, the lake. We get this incredible initial reaction from Deerslayer as he sees it for the first time. It's described as a scene of deep repose and solitude, untouched by man, that gives pure delight to him.
He is completely captivated. The sources note he feels unconsciously like a poet. He sees the lake and the sky and the trees, and he's reading a higher text. He's reading God's own printing right there in the landscape. It establishes his connection to nature as something spiritual, not just practical.
And this connection defines the man himself, Natty Bumppo, a young man only about 20, maybe 22. What makes him so special right from the get-go?
Well, his core identity is one of absolute integrity. Our sources detail his purity of purpose and a sincerity of feeling that endear him and render him remarkable. In a world that's full of cynical frontiersmen and duplicitous colonial officers, Deerslayer is remarkably, you could say impossibly honest. He just embodies this ideal of frontier virtue.
And we get that small, kind of amusing detail that his penchant for telling the truth can be an irritant to other people. It's a world where the truth isn't always convenient.
Precisely. Now, physically, he's a skilled woodsman, but he's not slovenly, not at all. He wears dressed deer skins, but he pays attention to smartness and the picturesque. His rifle, which is practically a character in its own right, is pristine. The handle on his hunting knife is carved, his powder horn is ornamented with care, and his shot pouch is decorated with wampum. He takes pride in his tools and his appearance, and that reflects the careful, considered nature of his character.
And this meticulous nature stands in such sharp relief against the man he's traveling with. Henry March, better known as Hurry Harry.
Or Hurry Scurry, yeah. And Hurry Harry, who's a bit older, maybe 26 or 28, is the exact opposite. He relies entirely on his fine form and great stature, his boot strength, but he's reckless and slovenly in dress. He's just fundamentally flawed because he lacks any sense of duty or morality. He's always in a hurry, but does not necessarily have a clear goal. He's all motion, but no direction.
And his most toxic trait is his absolute racism, his contempt for the native people. He holds utter contempt for all Indians, seeing them as an inferior species. He basically represents the coming tide of settlers who only see the indigenous population as obstacles to be removed.
And Cooper wastes no time showing us the moral difference between these two. Right at the beginning, Hurry shoots a doe out of season just because he can. It's a completely pointless act of casual, wasteful cruelty.
Deerslayer's rejection of that act is one of his first really definitive moral statements. He says there's little manhood in killing a doe, and he stresses that his name, which was given to him by the Delawares, refers to his quick sight and active foot, not valor in killing defenseless animals. It links his identity to precision and necessity. not wanton destruction.
And this profound moral divide leads us directly to the concept that structures Natty's entire existence, this doctrine of gifts.
Okay, let's unpack this doctrine because it's really complex, and it's central to understanding why Deerslayer can live among the native tribes without actually adopting their customs. He knows he's living outside codified law, but he insists there is a higher law and a lawmaker that rule across the whole continent.
The gifts doctrine is Cooper's attempt to reconcile cultural differences with a universal moral framework. Natty argues that tradition and use and color and laws make such a difference in races as to amount to gifts. So each race has been given a particular nature, a set of moral obligations they have to follow.
So an Indian might be given the gift of scalping in war, but it is, again, a white man's gift to do the same thing.
Exactly. This allows him to coexist with the Delawares, respecting their traditions while maintaining his own moral purity. But this is where the doctrine gets intellectually tricky, and frankly, where it contains an internal contradiction that we really need to talk about. Well, if the gifts are inherent and God-given, how does he categorize some tribes, like the Mingos or the Hurons, as naturally perverse and wicked? If their wicked acts, like scalping, are part of their gift, then why judge them as inherently perverse?
Oh, okay. So he's trying to be a cultural relativist, but his Christian framework is forcing him to make these absolute moral judgments about certain groups. He respects the Delaware gifts, but he condemns the Huron gifts.
It suggests that while culture might dictate the form of an action, a basic moral rectitude has to transcend color. He sees the Hurons as having willingly deviated from the true path, maybe even within their own red gifts. He can respect Chingachgook, a just-minded warrior, because the Delaware nation represents a nobler, if fallen, form of native virtue. The Hurons, in contrast, are just fundamentally corrupted by both their nature and their customs.
That's a crucial distinction. It lets Cooper create his ideal hero Deerslayer, who can move freely between these worlds, adhering only to the highest standards of integrity, which he frames as his white gifts.
And this natural moral purity extends to his views on religion. He believes the Father of all must be adored. It doesn't matter if you call him God or Manitou. The belief itself is what matters, not the specific theological form.
So he seems to be arguing for a kind of universal natural religion, free from the strictures of organized churches.
He is. And he criticizes the practice of idolatry, fashioning wood or bone into effigies or worshiping physical objects as definitively not being a gift from God. Instead, he prefers reading God's own printing in the sky and the woods and the rivers and the springs.
So the wilderness itself is the highest scripture for him. It's a beautiful, pure concept, but it also really isolates him. He's rejecting both the hypocrisy of European-style civilization and the perceived perversion of the Hurons, which leaves him entirely alone on his moral high ground.
He is. And as our sources note, he's revealed to be entirely incompatible with the march of civilization, which is why his stories always end with him being pushed further west. His integrity just has no place in the world of Hurry Harry and the people they are about to meet.
But Deerslayer's immediate purpose isn't philosophical at all. He is on a mission. He's meeting his friend Chingachgook, the big serpent, to rescue Chingachgook's betrothed Hist, who has been kidnapped by the Hurons.
And to do this, they first seek out Thomas Hutter, or Floating Tom. And Hutter is introduced with immediate moral baggage. He's a gruff old trapper and ex-pirate. This is significant. Cooper doesn't just give us a frontiersman. He gives us a man who fled civilization because he ran afoul of the law. He carries the moral corruption of society with him into the wild.
And his home, the castle, reflects this need for isolation and defense. It's an incredibly unique, nearly impregnable structure that's just floating on the glimmerglass. You can only get to it by water.
The description of the castle is so meticulous, it highlights Hutter's obsession with security. The walls are these thick, squared logs, 2 feet thick. And the chimney is unique, made of stiff clay put together with sticks and hardened by fire, which suggests this deep, almost paranoia-driven commitment to defense against any authority, whether it's colonial or native.
But the inside of the castle tells an even darker story about the people living there. In the bedroom, you find items that are far superior to what you'd expect in a frontier fortress. Feather beds, pretty shoes with silver buckles, 6 gay-colored fans, long gloves.
Right. These are tokens of high society, of a life of leisure, maybe even vanity. They're dramatically out of place in a rugged log structure, and they immediately suggest that Hutter's wife, and by extension his 2 daughters, Judith and Hetty, have a past that's rooted in the refined but morally ambiguous world of Europe or coastal society.
So the stage is set for a collision, and that collision happens almost immediately when Hutter and Hurry Harry hatch their plan.
They spot a fire, and they mistakenly determine that it marks an unguarded Indian encampment with only women and children. That critical mistake, assuming they can take easy, defenseless targets, is the trigger for their ultimate moral failing.
And their plan is just vile, and it's the perfect test for Deerslayer's gifts. They intend to paddle out, attack, and take scalps for colonial bounties.
And this is a moment we have to slow down and analyze because it's a profound indictment of the civilization that Hutter and Hurry are supposed to represent. Our sources confirm that various colonial authorities, British, French, Spanish, they regularly offered bounties on the scalps of unfriendly Indians. This practice effectively institutionalized and commercialized murder.
So scalping, an act that Cooper attributes as a gift of savage warfare, is adopted and financially encouraged by the so-called civilized powers. It makes the white men utterly indistinguishable from the most ruthless enemies they claim to despise.
And this is precisely why Deerslayer is thrown into a moral crisis. He argues vociferously against white men engaging in this practice. He refuses to have anything to do with it. He holds fast to his conviction. It is, again, a white man's gifts. The bounty money, the mercenary aspect, it means nothing to him because his moral currency is totally different.
But the moral reckoning finds him anyway, regardless of his refusal. Hutter and Hurry are captured almost immediately. Deerslayer is left alone patrolling the lake, and that's when he encounters an Indian scouting for a drifting canoe.
This scene, his first human kill, is really the emotional and moral core of the entire novel. It is not a moment of glory, it is a moment of profound, painful necessity.
He's so cautious. He doesn't want the fight. He makes sure to give the savage every chance to retreat. He hails him. He states his desire for peace and his adherence to his white gifts. He explicitly says he is not one of them that thinks it valiant to slay human mortals singly in the woods.
He is following every single rule in his moral code. He wants the Indian to know he is not Hutter or Hurry. He even goes so far as to exchange a handshake, offering this moment of true, if brief, frontier fraternity.
But the savage commits treachery. He feigns friendship, then immediately crouches down with his rifle, forcing Deerslayer's hand.
Deerslayer shoots, and the Indian falls. The immediacy of the action is followed by the profound immediacy of his grief and his reflection. This is the act that marks him for life, that earns him the name Hawkeye, but it comes at a terrible price.
The aftermath is what defines his character against the backdrop of the frontier. He insists scalping is not of my gifts. He takes the dead warrior's rifle, which is a necessary trophy of war, but he treats the body with dignity, placing it upright against a rock.
And he speaks to the dead man, reflecting that he didn't wish your life, Redskin, but he was given no choice. He struggles so deeply with the ethics of it, confessing that he cannot boast of killing a human mortal, even a savage, the way you would a bear or a catamount.
What stands out to me here is just the sheer weight of his conscience. Hurry, Harry, or Hutter would have celebrated the kill and immediately looked for the bounty. Deerslayer carries the burden of taking a life, even in self-defense. It just elevates him completely above the messy moral compromises of everyone else in the story.
It solidifies his identity. He's a warrior of necessity, not bloodlust. And it is this moment that proves he can maintain his purity, even when he's forced to violate the most sacred rule, thou shalt not kill. He justifies it, not by the nature of his victim, but by the necessity of survival and his adherence to a superior moral framework.
The plot then accelerates as Deerslayer goes after Hist. He's trying to meet Chingachgook near Council Rock, but the danger is just palpable. While he's waiting, he hears this repeated, quavery call of a loon.
This is a beautiful piece of suspense building. He recognizes the call. It's Hurry Harry's signal, but he suspects immediately that it's a deceptive lure set by the Hurons. His knowledge of the woods, his keen hearing, is his first warning system.
He manages to make sure Chingachgook and Hist escape the Huron camp, proving his loyalty to his friend even when it puts him in mortal danger. But he is ultimately captured. He's overwhelmed by multiple Hurons in this close-quarters struggle in the water.
And he yields with dignity, maintaining his composure. But while he's captive, the narrative shifts back to the castle, and Cooper affirms the moral order in his universe. Hutter and Hurry, the two men who went out to collect bounties on scalps, they face immediate consequences. Hutter returns gravely wounded and dies soon after.
And before he dies, Hutter utters those powerful, fragmented words: husband, death, pirate, law, scalps. It's this deathbed confession that confirms his whole life was built on evasion and moral transgression.
His death leaves the Hutter sisters, Judith and Hetty, to confront the mystery of this locked, valuable chest.
And the location of the key is such a tragic detail. It's hidden in Hetty's coarse pocket. Why is that specific detail so important?
Well, it shows Hutter's complete trust in his feeble-minded daughter. Hetty, because of her simplicity, is outside the sphere of human ambition and duplicity. She's inherently pure, like Deerslayer, and therefore Hutter trusted her to shield his terrible secret, knowing that Judith, who was intelligent but morally compromised, might try to use it.
So when the chest is finally open, the secrets that define Judith's entire existence just spill out. It's filled with finery, high society clothing, and crucially, letters.
And Judith, being intelligent and worldly, she pieces the correspondence together immediately. She reads letters from an affectionate, intelligent mother and references to an officer who came from Europe and who could hardly be supposed to wish to form an honorable connection.
The names are erased, but the implication is just shattering. Judith realizes the crushing truth of her illegitimacy. She is the daughter of a wealthy officer and a mother who was forced to cover her shame.
This is the dramatic crisis for the Hutter family. Judith later finds correspondence showing her mother initiated the marriage to Thomas Hovey, or Hutter, possibly driven by resentment, a desperate act to punish herself, or the officer who had abandoned her and left her daughter without a name.
This realization gives Judith this profound identity crisis, far more destabilizing than anything Deerslayer ever faces. He is rooted in the purity of his gifts. She is rooted in deceit and shame. It causes her to deeply regret the flirtatious behavior that the coarse Harry had mocked, because she realizes she was just replicating her mother's desperate choices.
Meanwhile, back at the Huron camp, Deerslayer is granted his famous furlough, or parole, which is a testament to the respect the Hurons have for his integrity. He's allowed to return to the Ark to propose a ransom for himself and for Hurry.
The ransom goods are incredible, and they all revolve around those tokens of the past found in the chest. We're talking about an ornate scarlet coat, a brocade dress, which Judith wears to dazzling effects later in a final, desperate plea, and these finely wrought ivory carvings. Chess pieces shaped like elephants.
Let's just consider the symbolic weight of those ivory elephants. They are not practical frontier items. They are objects of European refinement, strategic thought, and incredible value.
And Rivenoak, the captive Huron chief, he recognizes that value immediately. He is wily and intelligent. He mocks Harry as the king of the lake, a coarse, worthless replacement, and he tries to trade Hurry for just 2 of the ivory beasts.
This whole negotiation highlights the difference in currencies. The white man values scalps and quick profit, like Hutter and Hurry. The Hurons, represented by Rivenoak, they value high-value cultural artifacts, and they value moral victory. Rivenoak's attempt to force Deerslayer to betray Hutter or his friends is a calculated psychological move.
And Deerslayer resists all of it. He insists on his integrity, rejecting Rivenoak's offer. He confirms that keeping his word, the core of his white gifts, is non-negotiable, even if it means returning to face torture and death. That adherence to his parole, even with a so-called savage enemy, is the ultimate proof of his character.
The climax is set by the ultimate test of Deerslayer's moral rigidity. He returns to the Huron camp exactly at noon, the precise moment that was set as the limit.
That punctuality is just stunning to the Hurons. It's the moral victory that Rivenoak recognizes. They respect him for keeping his word in the face of death, proving that his integrity surpasses their expectations of a white man.
So Rivenoak, in a final attempt to salvage something from this honorable enemy, makes the famous offer of adoption. Deerslayer can live if he accepts Huron gifts. Join the tribe, marry Lesumac, the widow of the warrior Deerslayer killed, and feed her children.
This is so much more than just an offer of life. It's an invitation to find a new identity, a new family outside the civilized world that rejected him. But he refuses.
He stands firm on his moral code. He asserts his white gifts regarding wives. He refuses to take a wife from among the heathen or to abandon his identity as a hunter and warrior to save his life. He's polite, but he's definite. He also gently rejects Lesumac by noting he may never marry, but if he does, none but a woman of my own color and gifts shall darken the door of my wigwam.
And that rejection, especially the slight to Lesumac's honor, just fuels the rage of her brother, the panther, and the other warriors. The moral respect transforms instantly into a thirst for vengeance. The torture begins.
The Hurons start their preparations in this profound silence, which really emphasizes the seriousness of the trial. Deerslayer is subjected to the trials of the knife and the tomahawk, and he endures these near misses with unflinching firmness. His composure is the weapon he's using against his counters.
Then comes the rifle trial, an event that brings up both the peak of Cooper's idealism and the most intense critique of his lack of realism. Marksmen fire at him from close range.
And he remains perfectly still. Our sources highlight this absurd detail. Deerslayer's expertise is so acute that he can tell, within an inch, the precise spot where each bullet must strike, for he calculated its range by looking in at the bore of the piece.
That is physically impossible, of course. No human can calculate a bullet's path by looking down the barrel. But Cooper uses this impossibility to stress the moral superiority of Deerslayer. His contempt when the marksman missed shows not just superior skill, but superior moral nerve.
He is using his spiritual purity, his integrity, to defeat the Hurons psychologically, even before any rescue arrives. He makes them look clumsy and morally bankrupt through his sheer refusal to show fear.
The tension is then broken by the arrival of the single most innocent character in the book, Hetty. She rushes in and scatters the blazing torture pile with a stick.
And here is another key moral moment. She is utterly untouched. The Hurons, out of a combination of respect and maybe superstition regarding her perceived mental state, they do not harm her. Her purity acts as a shield, illustrating that true innocence holds a power that surpasses the rules of warfare.
Judith, seeing this, makes one last desperate attempt at a ransom with the brocade dress and the ivory, but Rivenoak is now just determined on vengeance. Just as the execution seems inevitable, the British military arrives.
Captain Worley's detachment bursts onto the scene, signaled by Judith's dramatic entrance and the subsequent battle. This is often framed as the rescue, but Cooper immediately darkens the triumph.
The intervention is just a violent, confusing melee, a slaughter. Many women and warriors, including Lusumac and elderly women, are killed indiscriminately by the bayonet in the confusion.
The violence of civilization is revealed to be far less disciplined and morally precise than the single-minded vengeance of the Hurons. The British troops, who are supposedly rescuing the heroes, commit an atrocity. And this just reinforces Cooper's central thesis, that the encroachment of civilization is often more destructive than the frontier life it replaces.
The final acts are so tragic and swift. Hutter is buried in the lake next to his wife, but Hurry notes the body was tethered like a bear, a final, undignified detail affirming his life as a fugitive.
And then Hetty, the purest character in the book, is found mortally wounded by a rifle bullet, an innocent casualty of the melee. Her purity couldn't save her from the random, brutal chaos brought by the military intervention.
Her final words, which she addresses to Hurry Harry, are the moral summation of the entire tale. She wishes he would try and be more like Deerslayer. She recognizes that moral goodness, not strength or speed, is the quality worth striving for. And then she is buried in the lake next to her mother.
With the Hutter family decimated, Judith, who is emotionally shattered by the revelations about her identity and the violence she's witnessed, she offers herself to Deerslayer. She seeks a quiet, domestic home, recognizing that his integrity is the only stable point she has ever encountered.
And Deerslayer's refusal is painful, but it's consistent. He gently but firmly refuses, stating he is too rude and ignorant for her. He sticks to his own nature as a hunter and warrior. He maintains that it wouldn't work because their gifts are too different, stating, "A man like me is too rude and ignorant for one that has had such a mother to teach her."
This refusal really underscores his fundamental separation from civilization. Judith, for all her flaws, represents the potential for a settled life, for society. Deerslayer cannot compromise his solitary, pure nature for domesticity, even with the one person who truly recognizes his worth.
And the ultimate haunting fate of Judith is left deliberately ambiguous. Hawkeye Natty's later name, he later learns that Sir Robert Worley lives on his paternal estates in England with a beautiful lady in the lodge who does not bear his name.
Did Judith find security by reverting to the same desperate, potentially dishonorable path her mother took? Did she become the soldier's victim again, sacrificing her identity for protection? Coop just leaves the question hanging, forcing us to confront the harsh reality that purity, once it's lost, is rarely recovered.
And just a quick note on the chronology before we wrap the plot analysis. Cooper, throughout the Leatherstocking Tales, he often sacrificed exact chronological detail for the dramatic moment. Here, Natty is around 20 or 22, but when he revisits the lake with Chingachgook and Uncas, Uncas should only be about 15. Yet he's portrayed as a mature warrior before his death in Mohicans in 1757. Cooper cared more about the emotional truth of the scene than the precise timeline.
So after this deep dive, what does the Deerslayer really reveal about Cooper's overarching literary project? He set out to create this idealized figure, Natty Bumppo, who is entirely removed from civilization's inducements to err. His refusal to scalp, His absolute adherence to his word, even to his enemies, sets him apart as a highly moral being.
And this idealism, as our sources point out, makes him almost a monster of goodness. The imagination has an easy task, one critic notes, in portraying a being removed from the everyday inducements to err, which abound in civilized life. In the woods, Natty only has to contend with necessity. In society, he would contend with temptation and greed.
But this immediate idealization, especially when you combine it with the unrealistic physical details, brought swift and famous criticism, most notably from Mark Twain. Twain was just merciless in pointing out where Cooper's writing defied logic and realism.
We have to talk about the famous exaggerated heroics. As we noted during the torture scene, the implication that Deerslayer could calculate a bullet's exact path by just looking down the bore it's physically ludicrous.
And that's just one example. Twain also highlighted the instance of Pathfinder, another of Natty's names, who could supposedly shoot 3 bullets through the exact same hole in a distant target. The sheer absurdity of the marksmanship defied physics, yet everyone in the story just accepted it as fact.
So if the physical details were so flawed, if the dialogue often suffered, critics noted the characters spread a 2-minute remark out to 10, and the talk wandered all around and arrived nowhere, why does Cooper endure? Does he even need physical realism to achieve moral realism?
And that is the essential intellectual debate, right? Cooper sacrifices dialogue realism and physical detail accuracy for moral and poetic impact. He wasn't writing a technical manual, he was writing a myth. He wanted to show a man who sees God in the forest, hears him in the winds, bows to him in the firmament.
And to achieve that myth, he needed a hero of impossible purity. If Deerslayer had been merely competent, he wouldn't have resonated as an American archetype. The exaggerated skill, the marksmanship, it's a metaphor for his exaggerated moral clarity.
It's the irony our sources bring out. Critics noted that Cooper is most interesting when he's not noticing what he's about, meaning when he focuses on those sweeping moral dilemmas, the nature of the wilderness, and the profound contrast between characters like Natty and Hurry Harry. The story works beautifully, despite all the technical flaws.
So the critique focuses on the mechanics, but the lasting power rests entirely on the philosophical and moral core. Natty Bumppo is ultimately a tragic figure precisely because he cannot compromise.
And that leads us to the inevitable conclusion. The story deliberately leaves Judith's fate unresolved, reflecting the world of transgressions and selfishness that we all inhabit, where neat moral endings are rare. Yet the tale offers these gleamings of that pure spirit in the human likeness, primarily in Natty Bumppo.
Which leaves us to ponder the practical sustainability of that moral purity. In a world driven by self-interest and moral compromise, the world of colonial bounties, pirate fathers, and casual cruelty, how long can an unwavering moral character like Deerslayer truly survive outside the poetic confines of the story?
His purity is what makes him unfit for the coming civilization. He is too good for the society that will inevitably replace the wilderness he loves. The entire arc of the Leatherstocking Tales shows him being perpetually pushed further and further west, away from the very settlers he saves, precisely because they cannot accommodate his moral rigidity.
He saves them, but they can't save him. His integrity requires the vast, open, and demanding canvas of the wilderness to maintain its perfect, unblemished form. Once the surveyors and the lawyers arrive, the space for a man of absolute truth just disappears.
And that's the final provocative thought we want to leave you with. If Natty Bumppo were placed in modern society, where moral compromises are an everyday necessity for survival, would his gifts serve him, or would his purity ultimately break him? Is absolute integrity a necessary luxury afforded only by isolation?
Something to mull over as you navigate your own complex world. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into James Fenimore Cooper and the moral compass of the Deerslayer.